Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, my buddy Lucas, the founder of the Filmomat project, and I are taking a closer look at a legendary lens, the Leica Noctilux f1. It was produced and sold between 1976 and 2008. The name consists of nocti, which is derived from nocturnal, and lux, which is Latin for light. So obviously this lens is well suited for any kind of night photography or shooting it in low light situations. And in order to test it properly, we took it out on two different photo walks, one at night and one in broad daylight. And this one was in the Olympic Village here in Munich. And in this particular case, Chiara, Lucas' partner, was kind enough to tag along and be available for a couple of portraits, which is of course a great opportunity. When you have this kind of lens, you really want to shoot some portraits as well. With respect to film, in daylight we were shooting Kodak Portra 400 and Ilford Pan f50, and also used a neutral density filter that took away 3 stops of light and enabled us to shoot the lens wide open as well occasionally. And at night we were shooting Kodak Portra 800 and Ilford Delta 3200, both rated at ISO 1600. And of course, all the films were developed in the Filmomat and then scanned by Lucas with his Pacon F235. So let's take a closer look at this legendary lens, its features and optical performance. So let's get some historical context first. The Leica Noctilux was first introduced in 1966 and came with a widest aperture of f1.2 initially. At the time it was the world's first production aspherical camera lens, and yet Canon had released its much faster f.95 5 years earlier. And this is also why Leitz heavily focused on the aspherical element in their Noctilux in the marketing material at the time and really emphasized that. The Leica Noctilux was then updated in 1976 to the f1 version. And this version here came in 3 iterations in the course of its production time until 2008. All the iterations share the 60mm filter size and a weight of 584 grams. Our version here is the Type 2, which was probably produced in 1982 based on the serial number. Leica then updated the Noctilux in 2008 with the incredible and available until today version, which is a 0.95 aspherical version that is significantly heavier and comes in at 700 grams but retains the 60mm filter size. Our review is focusing on the f1 version, and this here is coming with 7 elements in 6 groups. So this is the construction of the lens, and elements 2 and 5 are made out of, as Ken Rockwell calls it, the magic lights glass, which apparently has an index of refraction of 1.9005. The Noctilux comes with 10 aperture blades that really beautifully click into place and create the famous out of focus areas that we will take a closer look at in a minute. So what about the optical performance of this lens? The Leica Noctilux is a true character lens, and its optical performance is really special and nuanced, and it takes some time to get used to it and to understand it as well. Most importantly, it is geared towards f1, so it is meant to be shot wide open, and of course this is also just reasonable. If you decide to put that amount of money into a lens, you better use it at f1 a lot. And here what is interesting is at f1 it really performs the most interesting and makes use of its full character. So looking at the different characteristics, what about the bokeh? The bokeh is obviously its unique selling propositions, and many people go for that lens because of the bokeh and the out of focus areas and how they are rendered. But what is interesting is that the bokeh is only really beautiful and buttery smooth in the center of the frame. Towards the edges, you can really see that it becomes sometimes outright weird and really swirly, especially when you have situations with a busier background, like we had here in that portrait of Chiara. We can really see that transition from, okay, buttery smooth in the center, and then towards the edges of the frame, especially with the trees in the background, it just gets a little bit weird and crazy. With respect to vignetting, we do see a similar effect. At f1 we have really strong vignettes, and you can sometimes recognize an image, a Noctilux image, just by the strong vignetting. And when you stop down towards f4, it improves a little bit, and then it is really gone at f5.6 and beyond. But initially, again, at f1, where you're most likely to shoot it, you can really see these strong vignettes in the frame. The lens produces light blobs in the lighter areas of the frame, and this is also kind of contributing to its character, and many people really like that you have these blown out blobs and highlights in the frame in the background. The lens is also not particularly sharp, especially when shot wide open, so even in that very thin area where the focus is lying, and when you nail focus, you sometimes wonder, is that all? Did I really nail the focus? Is that the sharpness that it can produce? And yes, this is the sharpness it can produce. The contrast is pretty good. Yeah, this is the sharpness you get, and it also, this kind of soft and tender look contributes to the dreamy character of the lens, and it's again part of its feature when you shoot it wide open. Interestingly, the Noctilux also creates a really particular color cast that no other Leica lens produces, and that is often described as rather warm and even a yellowish tone, and it really came out nicely here, especially on our sunny day in the Olympic Village with Kodak Portra. This kind of contributed to showing that and bringing that out. The diaphragm has straight edges at f1 through f2 and f5.6 through f16, and interestingly inwardly curved edges at f2.8 and f4. So as you can see, overall you really need to get to know this lens and the different qualities it has at different apertures, and how you can make use of that to create unique images. So at f1 you will always get these dreamy images, a lot of swirls towards the edges of the frame and the out of focus areas, a lot of vignetting that draws you into the frame, and really a dreamy character, special look to it. When stopped down, of course, it does not make sense to have such a heavy and large lens with you, and yet, especially at 2.8 and f4, you can still create really interesting images and looks here with this lens, and it becomes significantly sharper already when stopped down a little bit. So much about the optical performance of the Noctilux. So what are our personal impressions? The Leica Noctilux is a truly special lens and certainly lives up to its legendary status in our test. And yet, when you don't need to shoot at f1, it simply cannot compete. It is too heavy and too large for most situations, and here I would just recommend to go for a 50mm Summicron, so an f2 lens, or if you really need to have an additional stop of light, a Summilux with an f1.4. But to really justify the size and weight of the Noctilux, you need to shoot it a lot at f1 and have the kind of situations where you need that, or really want to create that kind of look all the time. Nailing the focus at f1 at the same time is pretty difficult, especially at closer distances. And the only thing that helps here is to have a bright viewfinder, to have a pretty large rangefinder patch that also helps, and of course a calm hand and some time to really focus it correctly. What supports you in this endeavor is the long focus throw that makes a lot of sense for such a lens with such a wide aperture and thin depths of field. But at the same time, such a long focus throw is also potentially annoying if you need to be quick. So this is not the lens where you quickly focus on something and then take a shot, but ideally you take your time during a portrait session, as we did it, to really focus on the eyes and rearrange your composition and take your time in focusing on your subject, especially if you're at a closer distance. Speaking of close distance, it is limited to 1 meter, the close distance focusing, which is actually a good thing because anything even closer would be really hard to focus, and yet a 1 meter distance with a 50mm lens is sometimes a bit limiting when you have a certain composition in mind that would require you to go closer. A really big disadvantage of this lens is the significant finder blockage that it comes with. So you can expect in most finders, of course Leica finders are different, as you know, with respect to the magnification, but in most finders you will see a significant portion of your frame being blocked in the lower right corner. And of course you can briefly rearrange your composition to double check whether anything would be here in the frame that you don't intend to be in there. But this is simply important to mention. It is such a huge lens that it will block parts of your finder. As mentioned before, the vignetting is pretty strong between f1 and f4, and you should be aware of that and rather intend to use it in an artistic fashion. If you're not fond of lenses that vignette, the Noctilux is not something for you. Last but not least, and most importantly, this lens comes at a quite significant cost. So even today, the price tag will range slightly below 4,000 euros for a cheap version of this lens. And if you want to go for a near mint or even mint condition lens, you can easily pay up to 5,000 or even 5,000 euros or even more. So please keep that in mind. It comes at a high price. It is a really heavy and large lens, and it only makes sense if you really intend to shoot it at f1 and in that area, so mostly wide open, to really make use of its character and its unique special characteristics. If you intend to stop down anyways, then I would always recommend to go for a lighter 50mm f2 Summicron, for instance. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and our review of the Leica Noctilux f1, a legendary lens with a unique character. If you did, please remember to like this video and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.